We're back in the Oxford landscape to take a look at the sarcophagus we identified during our last dig. And we've got two important questions to answer. Can we identify the bones that the farmer placed back in that sarcophagus? And can we find any undisturbed Roman soil?
And this is also a fantastic opportunity for Naomi to sample the soil both around the coffin and underneath. And we're also hoping to be able to take a look at Roman funerary practices. What kind of grave goods did they put in the grave and what kind of ceremonies went on at the funeral? And this time we've got less than 3 days to do it.
Our site is situated on the Broughton Estate in Oxfordshire, where Time Team visited last year to investigate the huge Roman villa in the neighbouring field. But with efforts of that dig focused on the main site, we left some unfinished business at the end of day 3, so we've returned with a small team of specialists, our expedition crew, to further investigate the very sarcophagus that brought us here in the first place. You can see the relationship between the Roman villa in the field behind me and the sarcophagus buried in this field here. And we've got metal detectorists trying to identify the location of that burial as we speak. While ploughing this field in 1963, a farmer struck the edge of a buried Roman sarcophagus. Archaeologists were called in to investigate, and they removed the bones for analysis. The remains were later reinterred back within the sarcophagus, and the field was returned to agriculture. The exact location of the burial was lost until 2016, when it was rediscovered by Time Team's resident metal detectorist Keith Westcott, who then realised there must be a Roman villa somewhere nearby. What a difference a few months makes. This is incredible.
It's amazing, isn't it? You can't see anything because the barley is just so high.
I mean, how we're going to find it in this crop, I'm not sure. I think we've got to put a lot of faith into our technology here. Keith, we're back where it all began. Presumably you identified this first and then that led us to the amazing villa over here. And we've come back full circle and we're investigating this.
Yes, well, it was always an odd spot for a sarcophagus to be on its own, so that allowed me to think further.
Standing here in this landscape with a crop like this, it gives a real sense of what it could have looked like, sweeping wheat and barley fields in the Roman time.
Yes, I wouldn't have looked too much different as far as this area is concerned.
So the occupants over in the villa could have been gazing out into this landscape over here at one of their relatives buried in the sarcophagus.
Well, I think she was so important to them, and this is the perfect position for her to be.
What a way to honour your family. Keith has relocated the sarcophagus with his metal detector. Adam and Pete have marked up the location of the trench, and we're ready to go.
Oh. How you doing, Pete? This is hard work, right?
Absolutely, it's certainly keeping me healthy.
Yeah, you're doing a cracking job. So last year, it was about a year ago we were here last, and we came down basically to the level of the sarcophagus.
Yeah.
So what we're going to do now, we've decided to put this slot across it, find the level that we got to, and then start to make a plan of action, really.
Yeah, absolutely.
So if we look at the picture from last year, Pete, we can see the layout of the sarcophagus really nicely here. So we've sort of put our sondage in across the middle of it here. And we've got some of the remaining bits of, we think this is the lid, and these are a few of the bits that we don't know whether these markings are natural linked to the sort of Eolitic limestone or whether they're perhaps man-made, so it'd be interesting to get to the bottom of that and if there's any more bits of the sarcophagus itself that might be decorated. But you can see it was particularly shallow. I mean, we shouldn't be going through this too much longer.
Well, we really shouldn't be coming down too much further. And actually, we're hitting some very, very solid soil here, so perhaps we're almost reaching that level.
Okay, we better crack on, I suppose.
Yeah.
While Lawrence and Pete continued to open up the trench, Helen caught up with Dr. John Pearce to find out a little bit more about Roman funerary practices.
John, we're assuming that the woman who's buried in our grave over there, in life, lived in the enormous villa in the field to the north. So when she dies, given that she's living in such an amazing kind of palatial establishment, what are the preparations that you have to do for that kind of funeral?
Well, a lot of it is about party planning. So we imagine that these late Roman funerals For someone like this in particular, they're big affairs. So the extended family would be invited. We imagine, she's a member of a major landowning family around here. So invite the peer group from round about. We might imagine her male relatives are, the members of urban councils and so on. So probably other people from public life.
So coming from the nearest town?
Coming from the nearest town, potentially. And then we would have, the household itself, tenants, workers, slaves, a big group of people, possibly running into 3 figures.
Oh, there we go, Adam. Look at that.
Oh, brilliant, that's fantastic.
It's got 2 edges there. I wonder, we've got to be getting quite close to the, there we go.
This end of the trench bends around.
Yeah, that's what we want to see. So we know the depth we want to get to now.
So not too much more to come off, which is a relief.
Yeah.
I know this has been encountered before, but it's still really rare to be able to excavate even a partly disturbed burial in the modern era with all the things that we can do that couldn't have been done 20, 30, 40 years ago.
Yeah, I think most of the ones I've seen are in gardens, stately home, museum collections from a century ago.
Yeah, I think most of them are antiquarian. There's hardly any been found since the great explosion of archaeology since 1990. And what the ones that have been found, of course, the scientific work that you can do on them is absolutely extraordinary, to be able to recover such tiny traces of grave goods and things placed around.
It's tough going on one of the hottest days of the year, but by mid-morning we've already got further than we did last summer.
What would have happened as she was brought from the villa up to her burial place?
I think we would imagine the procession. Probably the body is being brought on a bier or something similar from the villa itself. People behind her, and amongst that procession we would anticipate there being professional mourners. So wailing, tearing their hair and so on, music being played. We would imagine that there's going to be a speech of some kind. We would imagine the virtue of the deceased would be praised in whatever was said. There'll be eating and drinking going on, so the smells, there'll be sort of barbecue type smells. There'll be the deposition in the tomb with the grave goods placed with her.
Now that we've defined the extent of the burial, we can bring in John and the JCB and have a look at the area around the sarcophagus. We're hoping this might reveal materials associated with the funeral, or even help find the original cut of the grave.
We've now found our level then, but we have got an immense amount to do.
We need to really think about what we're going to do when we come down in these areas.
It's all very well looking at this lovely photogrammetry, but we really need to be able to colour things in, don't we? So why don't you draw it out?
Yeah. So let's get our sarcophagus in here. And if we put in a notional cut around it.
That we might or might not end up being able to see.
And then, broadly speaking, a trench edge. Pretty slapdash line.
It's looking beautiful, buddy.
And then I know that you mooted the idea of putting in a quadrant, which I think makes an awful lot of sense. So we'd have a section here and a section here, and we'd seek to remove the backfill around the sarcophagus in 2 opposing sections to give us a cross-section through the whole thing.
And then we can take some blocks, some columns along those, can't we?
And presumably, Naomi, could that give us enough access to put in a small sondage underneath and take some samples?
I'd like to hopefully think so, because obviously all the soil that we are sort of having a sieve and that we're going through with the metal detector, this is all soil that's been mucked about. To get a good decent soil sample, as soon as we start to see something that looks like it could be an original a Roman surface, that's where it gets a bit more exciting for me, I think.
No, that works really well for the quadrants in the backfill, but of course we've got to pay attention to what's inside the sarcophagus as well. So we can just very carefully work our way down and try and define the 1960s deposits, as we would archaeology, as we would.
And it's the finds that we're going for there. Not just the bones, but any tiny little grave goods, tiny little bits of smashed glass or whatever that they might have not noticed at the time.
So we should sieve that, even though it is 60s backfill, we should sieve that very carefully, shouldn't we?
We need to get all of her out as well.
Yeah.
With the sun beating down, we've found some tents to protect ourselves and the archaeology, and our strategy is beginning to pay off.
Okay, so we seem to be getting the lead lining on the inside. It's coming round here. How about your end?
Yeah, it's the same. We've got a lovely bit coming up. It's peeling away, sort of laminating away from the side of the sarcophagus here, but it's a beautiful thing. I mean, do we know much about the purpose
Hold
of
on, Lawrence.
Oh, blimey.
I think we're starting to get some human remains now.
Yep,
That's
definitely. Yeah, that's the first phalanx. Very big.
That's right where the remains were when
Yes.
we came down on it last time, isn't it? In and around these stones. So I wonder if those stones are packing around where they reburied the
Preservation's not bad, you know.
It's not bad, is
It's
it?
really not bad.
So do you think that the coffin might have been ready waiting for her? And she'd be perhaps, reverently placed within it and then laid out?
Yeah, it's a big question for these very substantial containers.
Yes,
When
'cause
you've
it
got
is
a
massive.
stone coffin and then a lead liner within it as well. How is it possible with decorum to have someone pre-placed in it, and then with all these people assembled and the speeches being given, to lower them in the ground with any,
Yes, with loads of workmen all
with
saying, over here a bit, mate.
Yes. So one might imagine, therefore, that some of this is done before. The pit is excavated, the coffin is put in place, the liner is put in place, and then it's the deposition of the body, either shrouded or possibly even dressed, into the receptacle objects placed with her.
We have found those fragments of lead that looks like it was pressed between the lid and the sarcophagus itself.
We've got this stone sarcophagus with a lead lining,
And sarcophagus literally meaning flesh eater.
whereas the lead would have preserved quite well the body.
Yeah.
And these big stones in the middle, we're still thinking they're part of the lid.
I think the lid, it looks like the lid was broken up and then used to backfill the sarcophagus when the bones were reinterred. And we've got an awful lot of lid fragments, so I wonder if we can piece some of them together.
That would be good.
We've been talking all afternoon about the kinds of grave goods that would be put in a grave like this. Things that wouldn't survive, like resins and perfumes, or even something like flowers. And the kinds of things that would survive, like glass vessels, pottery vessels, even coins. And Matt, our digital supremo, has been busy reconstructing the only grave good that we know of from this grave. What have you come up with, Matt?
We've made a replica
Oh my goodness.
based on the remaining photographs of what came out. We've 3D modelled it and had it 3D printed.
3D printed, but it looks exactly like glass. I mean, it looks exactly like Roman glass, and it's even got the weight of glass. I'm used to 3D printing being in lines, it looks very much like plastic. This looks phenomenal. What's it made of?
It's done in a opaque resin to match the records of the original find, and it feels really strange to handle something that was made as a digital model and brought back to site.
Yes, because it would have been in our grave there. The other thing that's absolutely extraordinary about it is how small it is. And we now think that these are perfume bottles or unguent bottles, but I gather that 100 or 200 years ago they were often known as tear bottles because it was thought that they might have collected the individual tears of the mourners.
It wouldn't have taken a lot to fill up.
No, it's so small. But you could also imagine just dabbing it on, couldn't you? Dabbing it onto your wrist with this rim that would kind of rub it in. It's almost like a special perfume dabber.
It's a shame we don't know what it smelled of.
No, you can imagine holding it to your nose. It is such a beautiful little object, isn't it?
When we first arrived this morning, I was concerned that we had too much on our hands, and particularly when we started excavating by hand and that sondage over the sarcophagus. But as soon as the digger arrived, it allowed us to open up a bigger space. We had it cleaned up by lunch and photographed, and the rate at which we've worked this afternoon has been fantastic.
This has all gone very well. I'm looking forward to getting to the bottom of the sarcophagus. I'm looking forward to getting it all cleaned off and get some nice photography for it. I can already see the chisel marks starting to come out. So no, I'm really excited. I've got to say though, I really do want to see inside as well.
We had been a little worried that there was no official record of the bones being reinterred in the 1960s, but just before the end of the day, our fears are put to rest. I think Lawrence just found the end of a long bone. But I could be wrong. This could be one of those moments.
I think he's wrong. I bet you a pint you're wrong.
No, that's bone. That's definitely bone.
What do you think, Naomi?
Okay. I mean, colour-wise, I mean, you should never really go on colour, but it does look like bone. However, I would expect it to either be coming this way and not really going down.
For me, it's that sound. It doesn't have the stony ting. It's got a gentle, soft thud when you scrape it.
It is coming back this way.
It is?
It is coming back
Take
this
it
way.
back.
That's stunned me, that has. In terms of, it stunned me, the preservation of that. It's amazing to say this has been dug out in the 60s, it was out, it's put back in. I mean, the little pieces that we had earlier were, you know, fairly good, but this, I mean, that's it. That's how you would expect to see it, you know, if you were excavating it for the very first time.
As we leave the cornfield after our first day, we're pleased to have rediscovered our Roman lady, but she's given us a lot to think about.
Well, cheers everyone to a successful, first date. So I think for me, a priority is getting the material that's still inside the sarcophagus removed and understood.
Totally. And for me, I really want to see if there's any remains of grave goods, you know, tiny little pieces of pottery or glass, something that would have been overlooked.
Yeah, that would be nice. And obviously we made that discovery just at the end of the day now.
Oh, I know. I was nervous. I was thinking this is not going to happen. Then, yeah, right at the very last minute, there it was, gleaming. And when I say gleaming, I can't get over the how well preserved it is.
Yeah, it's a really nice way to have ended the first day, because I think honestly we've made better progress than I thought we would.
And we've even had some little blobs of charcoal around the edge, which I think could be indicative of activities that were happening at the time of the burial.
I mean, a hell of a first day, but what a day we're going to have tomorrow.
You have got blisters.
I know.
Blisters?
One more day. Anyway, cheers guys.
Cheers.
Join Time Team on Patreon to access exclusive 3D models, masterclasses, and behind-the-scenes insights.